Welcome to the Globetrottin ADs. This podcast is for you, athletic directors, activity coordinators, coaches, and program associates based in international schools around the world. The Globetrottin ADs is proudly hosted by Nick DeForest from the American International School Vienna and Matt Fleming from the American International School of Budapest. Here they are now, Nick and Matt and the Globetrottin ADs.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Globetrottin ADs. Here we are in season 5, chugging right along. And we're going to have a special guest today. Today, our guest is J.P. Nerbun. He's a best-selling author, a leadership coach, and founder of TOC Culture Consulting. He's also a leading global sports consulting and leadership coaching expert, and has a podcast called Coaching Culture. And it's one of the top sports leadership podcasts in the world. So we're happy to have him on today. We're going to find out a little more about his program and what he has to offer our sporting community. But before we do that, I'm going to send it over to Nick, not far away, of course, in Vienna. How's things going in Vienna, Nick?
Yeah, lots of basketball happening. 3-4 weekends in a row of basketball.
Nice.
But we shouldn't forget to read. Over the Christmas break, I read 6 books. I can't believe it. One of the books I read is someone with us today, J.Ps. So excited to dig into that. You know, we love sharing resources, and this is a great one for everyone out there, not just a book, but everything. So, J.P., thanks for being here.
Hey, I appreciate it. It's good to connect with some fellow internationals here as well. So I'm over in Ireland, so this is fun. And it's like we're on the similar time zone. It's dark, I think, in all of our houses.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's water in between, but not as much as normal when we have someone from the U.S. Well, before we get into that and talk about the book and the other things, can you just give us a bit of a background? Because anyone listening might be surprised already to hear that you're in Ireland right now. So yeah,
yeah. Originally from South Carolina, where I grew up and played basketball at the University of South Carolina for a year as a walk-on. And then I made my first jump internationally to Ireland in the mid-2000s. And I went and studied at the University of Limerick in their physical education and sports science department. And when I finished up my degree there, I also started coaching basketball. And I got to spend some summers in Lithuania as well, coaching, which is pretty cool. But kind of around that time I finished up, it was kind of during the economic downturn, and I actually started looking at like potentially coaching and teaching in international schools, because there was not a job to be found in Ireland. But I ran into my wife, who's American. I ran into her in Ireland, and that's where I met her. And she brought me back to the States for, another 7 years before we were able to finally get back again in 2019. Where I've been. So that's how I ended up in Ireland, and with her job this second time in 2019, and we've been here raising our 3 kids since. But along that journey, I have been coaching basketball, and I was a high school teacher for years. In about 2017, I started TOC, which came out of a crisis in my own leadership and my own struggles, and realizing that, I wanted to build great culture, I wanted to impact lives, but the biggest obstacle in my way was myself and my own leadership. So I hired a leadership coach to work with me. And I think there's a lot of business coaches out there in the world, and not many for coaches, but I was able to find one, and that was huge. And so that kind of inspired me to set on this path to go out and help other coaches as well.
Wow, that's a great one. That's very honest, right? That you're obviously not just open here, but telling everyone, that I guess you weren't doing the right thing with your athletes, right?
Yeah, I always say, like, I had really good intentions, and if you had looked at my list of, the 5 things that were really important, definitely still on that list of 5 was impacting lives, helping develop character through sport, creating a positive experience. But yeah, just 1 and 2 often just became winning as results. And then I was just also ill-equipped. I just didn't know, better ways of doing culture and building character through sports and creating that positive experience. So some of it was my own leadership inabilities, and some of it was just a lack of knowing better ways. So,
Yeah. Yeah, because like it's interesting you say that, because how do you? I mean, it takes some self-reflection, right? And when do you get to that point where you say, "I think I need a little help," in terms of like wanting to grow more, or it's either that or maybe take another career path, I guess, or find something else to do. Or so I don't know. Like, was there any particular moment that kind of clicked when you came to that realization? You needed to reach out and do some PD or some kind of get some resources out there.
well, like initially early on, I was experiencing frustrations with the team culture and some resistance and the culture I was trying to create. Felt like I was the accountability piece, and I looked around at all the other coaches in there, and I felt like, man, the other coaches just let the standards slide. They let the behaviors fall apart, and I'm like, I'm not willing to do that. So I fought for that, and I brought in, hired a leader, got a leadership curriculum, and we've done character curriculums, and we did, get the book studies to do with the teams. We've done all that stuff, but it was helping, but it wasn't, a massive breakthrough. And I guess, there was no magical moment where it all just made sense. Like, oh yeah, you got to really focus on yourself first. But there's a few things. One is I actually had a parent sit me down, and a parent had built a relationship with me. That parent gave me some tough feedback, and that really rocked my boat. And then my athletic director, he leaned in and he had a tough conversation with me. And then I also stumbled across this book called Burn Your Goals by Josh Metcalf and Jamie Gilbert. And I reached out to Jamie Gilbert and struck up a relationship with him. And it all just kind of came together, this moment of awareness. And then there was the guy, and I wasn't probably ready for Jamie 2 years prior to that, but then I was ready for him there because I needed some help. And Jamie was a game changer for me.
That's awesome. Yeah. Very cool.
I have to look into that as we talk about books. That sounds like a one we should pick up. You've written 3, so your latest one is the one we want to talk on today, and it's about parents. So you just mentioned a tough conversation with a parent. It's called The Sports Parent Solution, and it gives you proven strategies for transforming parents from obstacles to allies. One of my favorite sayings is, I want my coaches to align the sails. Parents, kids, them, me, everybody, align the sails. And this book helps you do that. Absolutely. So let's dig right into a couple questions. Yeah. I want to talk about seeing parents as people first. I like that section. And I'll read something from the book. It says, all parents love their children and want to provide the best for their child. They are usually doing their best with the knowledge and skills they possess. It's often pretty hard for coaches that either do know or think they know more about their sport than their parents. Definitely was me before. Can you talk about how important it is not to be judgmental with the parents?
Yeah, I mean, in my previous book, The Culture System, I really focus on the mindset as well, because, the tools, the strategies, they don't work without the right mindset. If we just, see people as obstacles or vehicles for our own success, and for what we're trying to achieve. And so often that's how we operate in life, right? And, so it's really getting that right. And so when we think about parents and their role, it's very easy to jump and be at a point of criticism. Whether there's issues with our kid, we say, oh, they don't fall far from the tree, right? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We might come out with that line, or, we can really, the parent that wants to engage, that wants to ask questions and is really invested. We don't like that because they're too invested. But the parent that's not invested at all, well, I feel like we can just fall into those judgmental traps, and they just don't serve us well. What serves us well is building a relationship, right? And when we build a relationship with the person we're trying to influence, when we build a relationship with their biggest influencers, right, that person, then we can have a bigger impact. But I think too, it's also just to remember, to not be judgmental with parents is because, every parent is really just doing the best they can with what they know. It's the hardest job we've got is being a parent. And I actually find it funny because I think coaches sometimes make the worst sports parents. And in my experience, they can be pretty negative and toxic and know everything as well. And yet they've dealt with, toxic sports parents. But what I think has happened in most sporting contexts is parents get a really bad reputation because of one or two parents, or what we see on TV, the parent punching the referee out. And that's just not the experience. That's not every sports parent in your program. That's not the majority of sports parents. The majority are flawed, because we're all flawed human beings, and are just trying to best support their kid. And if we engage with them, we can actually really help them in a big way.
Yeah, and it takes that time, right? It's not something you can just snap your fingers, it's going to happen. It takes time to build those relationships and get everybody on board and making sure that you're heading in the right direction. Part of that too, in your book, you talk about the value of transparency, and you were great about doing that. My last question about how you kind of came to that realization of what you needed to do to make yourself better, and you were transparent with us. So that in your book, you say that the more open you are, the stronger the trust you'll build with parents. So if you want to talk a little bit about that and the value of transparency, and how through your program somebody can look and build in through that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so often we talk about sharing our why with parents, but what's the story behind that? And so why do I coach the way that I do? Sharing my journey into coaching and how my journey as an athlete has shaped my experience. For me, I dealt with a really emotionally abusive coach, a bully coach, as Joe Ehrman defines an inside-out coaching. I dealt with that in high school, and that's had a huge impact on my why, but also it has impacted how I show up sometimes. It's left some imprints on how default reactions on how a coach should respond that I've had to retrain. So I think sometimes just having transparency on your story is impactful. I've seen radical levels of transparency where we have coaches. I tell the story in my book of one college basketball coach in the States, highly successful, won a few NAIA championships, and he runs a father-son retreat. He brings, it's there to have fun, have some adventure, get some good food, but also to share, hey, this is what we're trying to do in your son's lives. This is how we're trying to help shape them. And we're inviting you into that relationship. So sometimes it's transparency to the most extreme of bringing them into team moments. That's a heavy way. When we have other coaches that, have run parent practices. We've seen this for swim teams, to basketball teams, to lacrosse teams at youth, high school, and collegiate Division I levels. So we're bringing them into so that transparency is showing, hey, this is how we do things. But I really think too, it's just, I go extensively into all the potential things you could cover in that first parent meeting of the year. Leave the real logistical stuff, the calendar stuff for an email. Really get into some of your philosophy and your ways of doing things, how you're going to build a culture. Sharing that helps them to be more supportive of those efforts. So the more transparency, the more trust we tend to build, for sure.
Just to follow up, do you still have parents though that still won't buy into it, or just, or won't get into the idea of what it is you're trying to do, even after explaining or having these sessions with them, or the parent training?
I think most parents, I think some parents, not most, I think some will be a little skeptical at first. What we see is that what I propose, this solution in the sports parent solution, just like I propose in the culture system, is not, hey, here's a few things you can do to make things better with your parents. Here's a few things in the culture system you can do to build a better culture. Well, I'm talking about a complete shift in the approach. It's not about doing some action that builds culture or some action that builds a partnership. A partnership is a relationship. And that means we have to focus on how we're continuously nurturing that relationship. And so we focus on the system. And so that system is, how do we establish that, that the program vision, the mission, the values, what we're about here? How do we communicate that to parents? How do we get them to bring that into that partnership? But also, how do we continuously support that partnership? And then there comes a point where we have to enforce it, right? We have to enforce boundaries and stuff. And so what I'm really proposing is not, hey, do this activity at the beginning of the year and your parent problems are solved. I'm just talking about little things that we can do. It's about addressing the way that we communicate all our processes and procedures, thinking of the parents in mind. How can we shape and change those things?
That's great. I think it really, viewing them as part of the team, right? They're on board with you. You're doing it together, right? It's not the parents over there and we're over here, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I like that. And I like, about that preseason meeting or the camp beforehand. It's not just dealing with things as they happen, right? It's building the relationship from the beginning onward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really important that you have that initial kind of onboarding, right? But then you got to figure out, how am I going to, in my environment, continuously to communicate and remind of what we set out? And that meaning too is not just one side. It's not, the coach coming up and communicating down to the parents. It's around, and I just came back from a 12-day trip in the States where I was speaking, at different universities and high schools. And a couple of the talks that I gave were to parents, and we actually get the parents and athletes sitting at tables together and sharing their experiences. And one of the things we always do is ask them to, create some parent standards. Say, what can you do as parents to create a great experience for the team? Athletes, the parents discuss, they come up with like 3 parent standards, and we combine those and to compile those into a few parent standards for the program. And it's really powerful because you allow them to kind of co-create the standards rather than just the coach sit there and tell parents what to do. And when you do that, you get parents setting some pretty high standards, and it's been pretty amazing. I remember one year, 3 years ago, I did a workshop for a big group of parents down in Louisiana, and they created the standard that before they could go talk to their own sons or daughters, they were going to go talk to another kid and, affirm them after a game. Okay. So every game they had to go to other kid and just, lift them up and offer some affirmation. Well, I came back just last year and we were doing a similar activity, but it was all new parents. It wasn't the same parents, but they already said, well, this is already actually one of our standards. And this is something we do consistently. So it's something that actually carried over for the last 3 years, and an amazing culture, very few parent issues. And I wouldn't even say, it's not about like, oh, we've eliminated all the issues. No, the parents have actually helped to enhance the culture, the impact. They support the coach. They create all these great experiences for the teams to have get-togethers. It's just really awesome. It's not about eliminating parent issues. It's about, you want to eliminate those, but it's about how you bring parents in to enhance what you're doing as a coach. And here's the real power in what we're talking about.
Yeah. Just question on that, and with going to another kid before your own, does that include opposing kids?
It wasn't in that context. This was more
interesting.
So how do you support the other kids on the team? Because I think a lot of times the parents are just cheering for their son, or they go straight to their son, they do the debrief, and it's like, hey, go celebrate another kid and the points they scored or their effort. And, we talk about affirmations and effective praise with the parents, but it was always on other kids.
Okay.
That's nice. Well, it's some things, in international schools with our short seasons, things like a parent retreat before the season, it just wouldn't work. Parents are moving in and out and the seasons are short. But one of the things in your book that does carry over 100%, well, lots of things carry over. I shouldn't say that. Lots of things work really well. But one of the ones that I like and I know I need to improve on is a weekly parent email. And that's something maybe you just mentioned how, you start the season off right, but it's little things you do throughout the year. So this seems like an easy thing to do to improve on that could make a big impact. So could you maybe just talk about what a parent email could or should look like throughout the year?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've got a coach who's mid to late 60s that I work with, high school Hall of Fame coach in the States. And, he has totally transformed his approach. And that took a lot of courage because he had some pretty negative experiences along his way. But his parent email, first off, it's just his personality is on the paper. I say the paper, on the text in the email, right? It's just, there's enthusiasm. It's just Coach Cerrone is all over, right? It's just you can feel it, his personality. And I think it's exciting to read. Like and I appreciate that. So I always tell coaches, like, if you have a sense of humor, show your sense of humor. Like if you want people to not take things overly serious when you lose a few games, like help them to gain perspective by just being yourself and how you communicate. So one is just bring your personality, but the other things are really trying to find ways to reinforce the culture that you're trying to create. And so if you've shared, you have core values, or you have like a hardest worker of the week, or I know like there's the hard hat award. There's just different awards out there people have like during, like to celebrate players that embody the culture. Talk about that individual on that email, right? Tell, share what they have done to earn that award. That's one thing, as well as I've seen coaches really take the time to recap the previous week. Maybe you had a couple big wins, maybe you had a couple big losses, right? Recap what's your perspective on that, share maybe a scatter report on the upcoming week, but really kind of communicate. I think so often with the coaches I work with, the parents don't even recognize all the good things they're doing. Maybe they're doing one-on-ones with the player that week, all the players to check in with them, communicate their role, work with them on, what how their development's going, ask them, if they have questions. But parents don't know about that because teenagers don't talk, right? So to their parents that often, right? So it's, hey, how can you communicate? Hey, this week we're doing that, or hey, this week we're doing a workshop on mental toughness or mental health, or we're trying to, this week we're really focusing on, what bringing joy or bringing fun into our practices. And we did a few fun things this, just to shake it up because it's been a tough stretch this season. So the more you can use that weekly email to just constantly be transparent around what's going on in your program, I think that they'll feel connected. So be supportive of what you're trying to do.
Awesome. Yeah. Just another point I wanted to talk about too was engaging in hard conversations. We kind of touched on this a little bit ago, but what do you think coaches should, or why do you think coaches should engage in or even embrace these types of conversations with parents? In addition to building the culture and building those relationships, they do happen. It's something coaches are probably preferring to avoid if they can. But I think, what advice would you have for somebody to be pretty well equipped, or as best equipped they could, to have those tough conversations?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of coaches feel, first off, they shouldn't have to explain themselves or have conversations with parents. And I want to go back to, I think it's a partnership. I think this is a partnership to support the athlete. So in a partnership, that means there's a relationship. And when you have a relationship and you value that relationship, you're going to have hard conversations because you're going to have conflict. You're going to have moments where expectations are not met, or there's disappointment, or there's frustrations. And so my encouragement with coaches would be, sometimes that hard conversation is initiated by a parent. Sometimes you need to initiate it because you've observed certain things within the way the parents showing up to practices or showing up to games, or the way that things that you're hearing from the athlete or other people around the parent, maybe at games or maybe it's other stuff that is of concern. But whoever calls that meeting, whether it's you or the parent, calling that meeting, I really like to try to include the athlete in it, if at all possible. But I like to go in with curiosity. And really, that's step one. Just ask questions and be really curious. And I could give you a list of some good questions, but I'm going to not do that. I mean, there's some in the book. The most important thing is the questions come from a genuine curiosity and a lack of judgment. But if you have strong judgment and assessments of the situation, then your questions will just be to really probably get what you want to get out of them. So ask questions, really listening to understand their perspective. So it's real active listening is step one, asking questions, and share back what you heard from them. So, hey, here's what I think I just heard. You're really frustrated because you don't understand why Johnny's not playing, and he's put all this effort in the off season, and he's put everything in. He's been the most committed guy, and yet you think other players are playing over him that haven't put the work in. Yeah, that's exactly it. Okay, great. Now they feel listened to. I can move to step two, which is I can share my perspective. My perspective is made up of my observations, the facts. Here's the facts. Johnny actually has been late the last 5 practices, or Johnny actually has had a really bad attitude in practice recently. So share the facts and then share your assessments. Assessments are different than the observations because observations are facts. Assessments are leaning more towards our interpretation of what we see every day. And so, hey, our assessment is based on what we know about the sport, obviously, that your son isn't good enough to be out there. whatever that be. So just sharing your perspective, facts, and your assessments. And after you've done that, I would come back and ask this very important question, which is, hey, moving forward, right? Let's just say their role is not going to change, or we've enforced some sort of disciplinary consequence, and they were held happy about that. Well, that's not going to change. My question would be for the parents: what can we do to support your son or daughter through this situation? If the son or daughter is really disappointed around playing time, their son or daughter is really disappointed around the results of games, their son or daughter is really disappointed in the fact that they have to sit out a game or sit out practices because of their behavior, right? Whatever it is, what can we do to support them moving forward? So it's about partnering together. That's step 3. So ask questions and listen. Step 1. Step 2, share your perspective. That's observations, the facts, and the assessments. And step 3, I always say is, hey, let's partner up to get back together, which is what can we do to support your child through this?
Right. Wow, that's great. And that could be any situation. You mentioned a couple, but really with those three things, that's great.
Yeah, and I like it a lot because Nick, it ties in with a lot of what we do and supporting our programs with educational athletics. That's a learning process he just described, and that's a lot of tough conversations our teachers are having with students and parents when there's difficulties or there's expectations that aren't being met, right? So, and the fact that we can bring that into the sport world when we have to, hopefully not a lot, but if you have to and you got those strategies in place, I think that's going to make the kid better, of course, number one. It's going to support that relationship and making sure everybody's on the same page. It's really going to be beneficial for your program and for your team, of course, at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that, and I've had coaches that have used that, and the results have been incredible. One story is of a coach that was called by a mother and was complaining and had all these issues, and the coach was just asking questions. Sort of step 1, and finally, Laura's like, you know what? Just listening to myself talk right now, I realize I've been a complete idiot. I'm really sorry I've wasted your time. I apologize, coach. Now we've also had other situations where a parent, I have a high school coach, young coach, he sits down, he's got the athletic director in the meeting with the parents. The parents are upset because one of their senior twins is not playing in the minutes that they think he should be playing because he's a senior. This young first-year head coach just asks a lot of questions. The parent communicates their perspective, and the coach then shares his perspective and lets them know, this is the way this program is going to be run. It's not going to be based upon the number of years you've been in it. It's going to be based on, are you meeting the behavioral standards and your performance? And, this dad was not happy. And he asked the dad, he said, well, what can we do to support your sons moving forward? He says, I'll have to think on that. I appreciate you asking. Dad pulled the team, the 2 boys off the team a week later. And you know what? That's okay. They ended up being culturally just fine for that team. And the team had started out 0-5, and they went on to win the next 9 out of, finished the season 9-3 or something like that. So, it's not every conflict is going to necessarily have this beautiful ending where the parent is, oh, I'm so sorry, but you get them to a place where they at least understand what you're about.
Right. I think that the maybe the good thing sometimes in our world here is usually parents and families stay 2 to 3 years. So even if there's someone that doesn't buy in, doesn't really get you, even though you've tried, it's usually not too long until they find a new home. So anyway,
somebody will replace them. Yeah.
Great. Well, look, hey, we're not going to give away everything that's in the book because we want people to go out and read it, and they can pick it up on Amazon. But also on your website, I think, with links and everything to your other books too. Can you just tell us where people should go and how to contact you?
Yeah. If you want to learn more about me and my other books, go to tocculture.com. My second book, which I also recommend, it's kind of the Sports Parent Solution is kind of a sequel, though you don't need to have read the Culture System. but the Sports Parent Solution is kind of a sequel to the culture system, kind of very much based on the very same framework for how we build culture. So highly encourage you to check out that, as well as I've got an online course on transformational coaching and culture building at my website as well too.
Awesome.
No,
Yeah.
I hope people check it out. And you mentioned about going to talks in different schools around the U.S. for the last 12 weeks. So I'm sure that's an option too for schools in Europe, maybe that you're even closer to, right?
Yeah, no, I love getting in the room with coaches and facilitating, and been able to work with some really unique teams and organizations in the last few weeks here. Just University of Texas, USA Women's Field Hockey, William & Mary Lacrosse. So I move across all sports and all kind of demographics for sure. So
Awesome.
Well, I enjoyed having you on today, and I enjoyed hearing about you spent some time in Lithuania as well, right? So you were in the basketball mecca, kind of, there for a little bit. I lived in Latvia for a number of years, so I'm familiar with the Baltic region. So how did you enjoy your time there in Lithuania?
man, it was one of the best times of my life. I think we were in Sventoy, and we stayed at a school there right next to the beach, and we would just coach basketball all day and have, 2-3 practices a day. And then I would be coaching. Hundreds of athletes would come in from all over the country, and we were trying to help place them with schools in America if they were good enough. But we would spend all our time between then on the beaches, and the Lithuanian people are great people. And we had a blast. It was culturally so different from anything I'd ever experienced, but I was super immersed in it. I was like one of the only English speaking people around the area, and so that managed to pick up much Lithuanian. But it was a blast. So
yeah. And then one of the last questions when we ever have a guest on, and I think you might be the first in Ireland. Do you think, Nick?
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we always like to ask folks a little bit something about where they're currently located, especially if they're like a expat somewhere new or somewhere different than where they're originally from. So we like to ask them, any favorite thing you have about where you are in Ireland, food, drink, place to go, or anything you recommend for somebody who's thinking about maybe taking a trip through to Ireland?
Well, I mean, obviously the Guinness is much better here than anywhere else in the world. And I've enjoyed many Guinnesses over the years. Irish people, one of the things that I did early on in my time here is when I initially started as a study abroad student, and I fell in love with the place. And it's definitely not the weather. The scenery is gorgeous. The beer is fantastic, but the people are incredibly special. And so my thing was, when I was in study abroad, was I wasn't going to hang out with any of my fellow Americans. All the study abroad students seemed to go on the trips together all weekend. I joined actually an American football team that was full of Irish people, and it was just a cool way to connect with them. But, built such great relationships that, when I ended up getting married in the States, over 30 people flew over from Ireland for the wedding. So the people are fantastic. And if you're really looking for something that's sporting, that's great. Obviously, rugby in Ireland is really great, but the number one sport is Gaelic football. And so if you ever can come over to Ireland, go to Dublin and go to Croke Park, or even just go to a local GAA, Gaelic Athletic Association, a Gaelic football match. It's a great sport, high scoring, kind of a little bit like Aussie rules for those that don't know it. But it's an amazing sport, and it's all amateur, and people play for their county. And so it's an amazing thing when you can go to Croke Park in Dublin, and the best football player in the country, and arguably one of the greatest players of all time, David Clifford's out there, and he's out there and he's scoring and dominating, and the place is going crazy with 80,000 people. With only 48 hours later, he's back in a PE classroom teaching PE to secondary students. So our greatest athlete is just a PE teacher. I wasn't just a PE teacher. But yeah, it's just amazing, like to be in that type of environment. I think that's probably what sports was like in America maybe 100 years ago. They had other jobs.
That's awesome. That's a great answers. Thank you. Yeah, so it was awesome having you on, meeting you, chatting a little bit, sharing some resources. And you are the first of our let's say, mini book author series. So someone you know well will be on next week, John O'Sullivan, to keep this going. So, yeah, thanks for sharing.
Appreciate the opportunity, and obviously, you guys are doing special things in the international community, which probably gets a little overlooked by the American sports, and so it's fantastic that you guys are doing what you're doing. So I appreciate that.
Okay, well, thanks again for joining us, and all the best for your next endeavors, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Kukri are a global multi-sport clothing brand specializing in providing the world's most prestigious schools with bespoke made and designed team uniforms for students of all standards and abilities. If you are frustrated by inconsistent colors, branding, costs, and sizing across your school's uniforms, then it's time to discuss an offering where every sport is available, from softball to soccer, for male and female athletes at rates to suit your budget. To find out how Kukri could elevate the apparel of your student athletes to a professional level, email the team at contact@kukrisports.com. A dedicated sales manager will offer you a quote today. Mention this ad and receive a special offer on your coach or PE staff order.
Until next week, this has been another episode of the Globetrottin ADs.